Welcome back to the Now Morning Show, where technically I'll be getting a piece of the action since Rokas was spoken about leadership. Natasha talked about the youth vote, and now somebody wants to share a bit of their wish list, if you will, for the general election. Coming back to the Now Morning Show, Richard Solomon joins us in his capacity as Managing Director of Development Consulting Centre Ltd, giving us some insight from the business perspective, if you will, of some of the things that you would like to see post-general election. So good morning and welcome back.
Very good morning to you. Always good to be here.
Good to have you, because this is quite the perspective, and I think one that many can get a clear sense of return on investment, if you will.
Right.
Because this would be after the actual election. But I do want to ask you about how you feel before the election. Business-wise, are we satisfied with how we conduct business in Trinidad and Tobago?
If you look at ease of doing business, like most things, we sit in the middle of the pack in terms of countries. We're kind of in the middle.
Okay. Not a bad place to be.
Which is what people tend to see. And you're not wrong about that, except that the middle is really a frustrating place in terms of what it produces. Things do take too long to get done. You have to visit too many times to get a single thing done. Some systems just are not connected all the way through.
Right.
So middle is not horrid, but you're not really doing that great either.
Fair. And I guess that technically is why we will hear about that Ministry of Implementation and efficiency rather come post-elections.
Right.
But in that case, with us being just a few days away from the elections, tell us what we can, if we have a list, bullet points, what should we look, or what are you looking forward to or hoping for?
Yeah, I would say efficiency and accountability. I mean, those are the two easy ones. You know, I would like to be able to, for example, to go to a particular ministry and, you know, get something done that's not the typical thing that people do, but they do it there without having to speak to three different people and hear three different stories. I would like processes to be seamless, so that when I walk in, it is the same process and I don't have to wonder and somebody says, well, who did you speak to? It shouldn't matter. You know, when I call again, somebody says, well, tell me who you, so is it a tall person? Things like that. I really shouldn't have to deal with things like that. A piece of work that we were asked to do for an organization, for example, in the Bahamas, because they were having these problems. By the way, this is normal. You know, as organizations move and grow, people come up with their own ways of doing things.
Right.
They all fall within the boundaries, but they are different ways of doing them. And so we have an organization who says, okay, look, let's find the most efficient way. Let's get the people in one room, let's look at how it's done, and let's map it out so that everyone does the same thing the same way, so that customers, or in this case, the citizens or nationals, you know, residents know what to expect. So I would say, you know, efficiency is probably at the top of the list, and then accountability, and that's a pretty short list, but it's an important list.
It is a pretty short list. I think with accountability, though, we can measure that in certain ways, certain resultants that we can look for.
Yeah.
So what would that look like from the business end?
So accountability is what you're referring to, what that would look like. So if I can't get something done, then there should be a good reason for that. And somebody should be able to tell me why. And then when I go the next time, that person or someone that they report to should ensure that that is fixed or repaired, so that I don't have to do that. It shouldn't be that something goes wrong, somebody shrugs their shoulders, walks away, or a famous one, they're not here today. What do you mean they are not here?
For sure.
She is on lunch. What do you mean she is on lunch? No, everyone has to eat and people have days off. But we have systems that we can activate for things like that.
Right.
So somebody has to be held accountable for making sure those things are done. Because what happens is there's a cost to that. Now, it may not be a cost to the person who's on lunch. But if I have to go 3 and 4 times, then I'm paying for that. And there are opportunity costs for me. And if that happens 1,000 times across the public service, then you could only imagine what's the real cost to the nation, and then how that feeds into other problems. Because now, instead of going 3 and 4 times and somebody says to me by a door, well, I could handle that for you, bless me with something now. I'm not saying that I am part of that or I've ever done that. I'm saying that I've heard these stories.
Right.
Then we know how that plays out, and again, if you scale it up, then we could be talking about lots and lots of money and time.
And lots of money and time, making them two big priorities. But you said, though, that efficiency was probably your top priority.
It is, yeah.
Why is that?
Accuracy and speed. It takes too long to get things done. I was doing some work for the Cayman Islands government a few years ago. And out of necessity, I needed to go to the immigration department. And because I was doing work with them, I asked questions. And they said to me, it takes 2 days standard to register a company in the Cayman Islands. However, if you want to fast track it, and this is not a person by the door now, this is, we have a fast track that you can pay for. In other words, it's like your passport in Trinidad,
right.
You can get it quicker if you pay a couple $100 more. It takes 2 hours. What do you mean 2 hours? 2 hours? Speed and accuracy. Get it done quickly because I don't want to wait. If I have to wait, it costs me money.
Yeah.
Remember, the public sector is the core of the nation. Everything we need, identification, legal documents, etc., give life to an entity, we must go to the public sector. 25% of the labor force works there. So any inefficiencies in the public sector are not just public sector inefficiencies, they spill over into the private sector as well.
Which brings us to that proposal of the Ministry of Implementation and Efficiency. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, let me start here. I've heard people say that's a bad idea. Why do we need another ministry to help fix the ones that exist? Aren't we creating more inefficiencies? Well, if you know anything about organizational change and transformation, you wouldn't say that. It's hard for me when I'm up close, involved, part of the monster, to get the monster chained. I'm part of the monster. You see, usually what you need is someone or someone's from the outside. Everyone doesn't need to be from the outside, but everyone cannot. And I'm on record today saying, if a Ministry of Government Efficiency is created and all you have are people from within the very same government systems, it is doomed to failure from, let me look at the camera, doomed to failure from the start. You need people who could walk in and say, but why are we doing it so? They don't have the history. They don't have the burdens. They don't have the culture in their heads. They're just looking at it and saying, but why can't we, instead of going 1A, 1B, 1C, 2, why can't we go straight to 2? Oh, there is something written down years ago that says we can't do it. Can we change that something written down? You need that. And it sounds simple, but I can't tell you how many times I've sat in rooms with leaders in organizations and users of systems and asked these very same questions, and people go, well, we always do it so, you know.
Exactly.
Okay, but that's part of the problem. That's why it is as slow and as cumbersome and as expensive as it is. Maybe we can simplify the whole process.
So this is definitely pro with conditions.
Yes.
Now, in terms of those conditions, or going back to the idea of measuring parts of your wish list, if you will, what do you think that would contribute to in terms of, well, actually, both, your accountability and your efficiency? Check and check.
What would it contribute to?
Yes.
So,
or rather,
we hear stories, for example, of people who have applied for an HDC house for 100 years. Okay, not 100 years. But we hear these stories. And this has nothing to do with who's in power today or who was in power yesterday.
Right.
These
This
stories
has been
persist.
the system because the demand outweighs the system.
I would love to see that the HDC, as an example, is able to give me, or give whomever, I've never applied myself, but give whomever an answer within a reasonable period of time. I would love that cows are not eating grass in the front of houses that are complete. Cows are eating grass, the houses are there for many, many moons, and occasionally we see a spike in houses being distributed. I would also love to see that people who are occupying homes and are not paying the required rents or whatever dues they are would be dealt with according to the policies and the laws. And quickly. This should not take a long time because there's an opportunity cost. That's a great example. I would love to be able to go and make some amendment to some company document in the Ministry of Legal Affairs. Speak to one person and they tell me the right thing, right forms, and we get that done like this. I would love, here's another one, to file my corporate taxes, company taxes online, and not have to know somebody walk in with a check or something like that into a physical office to be able to pay those taxes. They've fixed it with the property taxes. Good on them. I can do it straight from my account, my bank account. I'd love to be able to do it. Get that system completed all the way through. Do you know how many man hours or person hours, if you prefer, will be saved if we could just get these systems working? And I have not asked for anything grand. I'm sure if you go across organizations, private sector organizations, and just ask the citizenry, we'd like to be able to get things done quickly. I'd love to be able to go and apply for a police certificate of good character and be told, not be told, we don't have the book right now. We don't have any in stock. You have to come back, check back in whatever days or weeks or whatever it is. I would love that to be done instantly.
I'd love
As
that
in,
to
I
be
go
done
in,
online.
put my fingerprint on the thing, and then they read it, and the system is connected up, and boom, you have no matters against you. Here is your police certificate, and you don't have to return in 2 weeks. And don't tell me those things are not possible. They're possible.
Definitely not going to tell you that with this sort of emphasis and we got this morning. But I have to ask if you think it is possible, or how possible it is.
Very possible.
The idea, the notion, the ability to actually enact those things. Going back to another conversation we have, will have a cost, will take some time. How possible is that within the next
Here's what we need. We need will. That's the number one thing we need. The number one thing we need is not smarts. We have that. It's not the systems. They're all out there somewhere in the system, out there in the world. What we need is the will to disrupt the known and the comfortable. That's what we need. The will to say, we're going to do this differently. We need leaders at the right spot to be able to say, this is happening. Yes, I know it's going to be uncomfortable. Yes, you're going to have to be retrained. Yes, you may become redundant. Yes, we may need to redeploy you somewhere else. But we're not building individuals. Our focus is building a nation. So it's very possible. That's what we need. The number one thing we need, and I will say, it's a good call from our Prime Minister in terms of a Ministry of Government Efficiency. But if there's no will behind it, I have seen great ideas die just because we don't have the will from those who will say, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but we're doing this. Leadership is not all about everybody being comfortable and happy and okay, Sometimes you have to be able to say, we're doing this. Because it's in the best interest of the greater whole and not just the individual or your comfort.
Greatest good for the greatest number. And while it will take some time, ultimately a very short list.
It's a short
very
list.
Doable.
Yeah, it's doable. It's just that we need to suck it up. You know what I mean? Like put on our belt around our waist kind of a thing and strengthen up and say, okay, yes, this is going to be uncomfortable for a while because we have to move things around. But we have to go fast up. I wager that part of our I don't wager, this is a fact. Part of our capital flight in this nation is directly related to the lack of the ease of doing business. I have not said so. Some of the companies that have left, they have said so. For what you pay, you don't get the kind of return that you would want. It costs us too much to do business here. We can't afford it. Oil is no longer sexy. Gas is no longer sexy. It's sexy, but deeper in the ground, we don't have as much.
Right.
So we need to win where we can.
Well, it sounds like we have a solid list that we can check back with you post-election. And so while our other guests have wished us a peaceful election and they look forward to the youth vote, what do you look forward to on Monday?
Whomever is coming in to office, because we will have a new administration come 29th, 30th kind of thing once EBC is done, and depending on if there are challenges and so. Recognize that we are building a nation for the long term. Recognize that we live in a world that doesn't need islands anymore. We're not special anymore. And if we do not become more and more efficient, we will continue to struggle and slide. It will affect our overall national development, and it affects every element, including that one of crime, education, infrastructure. Everything is affected by efficiency and accountability.
Richard Solomon giving us a wish list that we could probably revisit post-election. But after this break, we've got birthdays. Stick around.